And PowerPoint it is. So I grouped together the next couple of sections because they all have to do with getting results, like actual results entered into our BB results entry tool. So they're all going to kind of circle around our DTAs and things that we can do with said DTAs. And so interpretations are going to be one of the main components of blood bank results. So it fits. The interpretation tool is going to be our friend for this function. The interpretation tool is kind of like the granddaddy of old grumpy tools in our system. It is very set in its ways, and as long as you follow its rules, then it's pretty easy to get along with. I've been dealing with the interp tool for 11 years, and we get along fabulously. But if you try and go off script, if you try and do something it doesn't like, well, you're liable to run into some issues. So that's what I'm here for, to guide you through and hopefully ease some of the headaches that can sometimes pop up with our interpretations. So first things first, we're going to select our activity type there at the top. That one's easy, right? That one's blood bank. Then we have our two different modes for the tool. Now, this is the part, honestly, when it comes to interpretation build, that gets us in trouble the most. And you're like, wait, it's real simple. You add, you modify. Well, you would think, but it's something about the way the tool is structured. So there's a couple of places as you're moving through the tool, and it's going to say, hey, do you want to save your build on the previous screen? And a lot of people say, yeah, sure, that'd be great. But then, they might get pulled away to do another project. They might have the tool bomb out on them. And then they go back into the tool and I guess conveniently forget that they told it to save their build and think that they need to start over. No, you don't. You need to continue the build that was already started. So anytime you see that save box, yes, you are writing records to the database. And therefore, if you do have some situation where the tool closes and you need to get back into it, you have to go into modify mode. Just like any of the other tools that we use, where if you're building new, you click the new button. If you're updating existing, you click the open or modify button, right? So it's just like that. It's just something about this particular tool. People have a lot of mind blanking moments, I guess. So that is important. The reason I stress that so much, because our result entry tool is also very picky, and it is not going to be able to process an interpretation if there are more than one rows for that DTA out on the interp table. Right? So what we're ultimately doing with this tool is we're building out interpretation patterns. Result A plus result B can be interpreted as interpretation number one. Result A plus result C equals interpretation number two, right? So you're putting together these different combinations so that the system can assist the end user with that process, right? So the issue is, if there's more than one version of that interpretation in the database, result entry just throws up its hands and gives you a nice little error message. It says, nope, cannot process this interpretation or something like that. In which case, we come back over here to the interpretation table, or interpretation tool rather, and more than likely, you're going to see that there's multiple entries once you select that interp assay, that interp detail. So that's why we always want to avoid creating duplicates, because the tool will technically allow you to do so. Sometimes it pops up and are like, are you sure you want to create a new interpretation here? And you're like, yeah, absolutely, no problem, only to have your interp not work later. So always make sure you're in the right mode when you're in this tool. When in doubt, if you're not sure, just switch the tool to modify mode, select the assay. If something exists, it'll pull it up. If it doesn't, well, it'll tell you there's no interpretation pattern for this detail, for this assay. So that's what I'll do. If I'm not sure, if someone else has started the build before, I'll just switch it over to modify mode and have a look. It's very similar to just using an open menu in another tool. I'm like, I'm pretty darn sure I started that PowerPoint yesterday. And so I go out and I say, open PowerPoint. And lo and behold, there's the one that I started, just hidden away in some folder. So same sort of idea. If I don't know if it exists, I'm not sure that it's saved, switch it to modify, see what comes up. Next, we're going to have the order catalog procedure. So that's just making sure that we're linking the interpretation to the order, pulling in we call it the component procedures from the orders. And I don't know if I've ever actually seen something other than a one-to-one relationship. So you'll have like one order and it just has the one interpretation, and we don't reuse that across multiple orders. That's not something we really run into with blood bank, at least not in my experience. So there should just be one order catalog procedure there in the dropdown. So you do want to go ahead and select it though, because it's going to make nice, neat little associations out in our tables. Then we have the service resource selection. So remember before when we were building out those alpha responses, I said that the interpretation tool gets very, very grumpy if you try and build different alpha responses to different service resources. This is why, because even though it looks like we should have the ability to build different interpretations for different instruments and benches, the tool is a big fat liar, and that is not the case. Right? So if you try and build different interpretations for your individual benches and instruments, you can. The tool will let you. Result entry isn't going to work. Again, result entry does not like it if there's more than one row per DTA on a table. And so while, yes, technically it's possible with the build, it don't work. Right? So that is one thing that also sometimes confuses folks, especially if you've built interpretations for GenLab, because we do that sometimes with GenLab, different interpretation patterns for different instruments. But GenLab uses a session result entry. A session result entry is a little less cranky than blood bank result entry. So we have to stick to all service resources, and that will save you a whole heck of a lot of headache. And I am always down for saving headaches because I get enough of them as it is. On to the next row, we have the interpretation type. I'm not really sure why, but this is probably the second most common thing that people mess up with their interpretations. There are 4 possible interpretation types, right? You've got reference table, you've got alpha response, you've got alpha and text only. What those are doing, that interpretation type, is specifying what is the outcome of my interpretation. Is it going to be an alpha response? So result A plus result B equals an alpha response, like positive, negative. Is it result A plus result B equals an alpha response and some additional text that will free text here into the tool? Is it just text only? So text that we'll just define right in here and that the end users can see when they're doing the results. Or is it the 4th option, which is reference table? I don't know why this one is the one that people think they can pick by default. So reference table is only ever used for ABORH procedures. So I'm even going to type it here again on the slide. Reference table equals ABORH. That's it. It's the only thing that it gets used for. Nothing else, just ABORH. It can be your ABORH, it can be your ABOH type, neo-ABO, whatever. If it isn't talking about blood typing a patient, don't use reference table. This interpretation type is set up in a special way so that when it looks at the combination of our procedure type, there they come back again, of either patient ABORH or product ABORH, combined with the various different DTAs and their result procedure types, it knows that I'm going to be trying to result out those blood types, right? A neg, A pos, B neg, B pos, and so on. The ABORH values actually live on a separate table. Unsurprisingly, it's called the ABORH table. Why they're built out on their own table instead of a code set? Probably because of the way they used to have to be barcoded with CODEBAR. So, fact of the matter is, they exist separately in the database. So if I want to have results of my interpretation that are blood types, then I need to have a reference table as my results. It's a special result table there. So hopefully that is now crystal clear. Usually folks forget it all the time, but I do my best, right? So that is a couple more things. I always forget about this. If you choose an interpretation type that is alpha in text or text only, you're gonna have a text option here. And that text option will be modifiable or non-modifiable, which just means can the end user modify the text or not modify the text? So straightforward. But that's only for those text options. And then the last thing, this one's actually unique to Blood Bank, which is kind of interesting. The other lab modules that do interps or interpretations, GenLab and AP, they don't get this. So we're kind of special. And that is this little system generated versus a system validated. The difference here, we actually saw this Monday. Was it Monday that we did that? Yes. Where we had, excuse me, we had the two different types of ABORH that we did. All right, we had the one that was for the products, which was the unit ABORH, and then we had the patient ABORH. So if you strain your brain way back there, what you should hopefully remember is that when we first put in that blood type,
Stop.
Congratulations, the test was successful. Thanks, guys.
Yeah, that was
Good
fun.
job. It's not any more fun when you have two phones going off. I have my personal phone, my work phone. Yes, it tested. Hooray. Okay, that's over. Anyway, so I think back to Monday. We put in our product results. It automatically generated the result for us. In fact, you know what? Let's just illustrate, shall we? Why not? I'm all about that. Wait, what is this? Oh, go away, annotation. Let's go over here. So let me go to, let me receive a product real fast. BB inventory. Okay, we are at, I don't really care which supplier. Dude, doesn't really matter. Oops, that's the ERBC. I don't want that one. There we go. Expire whenever. Okay, now I have my product. So if I go over to result entry, and I go into product mode, RBC03. All right, so pretty classic blood bank tests. You've got component procedures, right? And this is one I've got anti-A, anti-B, anti-A, B, and anti-D. So if I put in my results, okay, and then I go over to my unit column, so this would be my interpretation, it auto-generates the answer, right? So that just pops right up. That is the system-generated interpretation. The system generated my answer. In contrast, the system-validated one, I would fill in my component procedures, and then I'd come over here and I'd have to manually select that interpretation. And the system is going to double check and make sure that I answered it correctly. So it's kind of like the difference between just using a calculator on a math test versus doing it by hand and then someone checks your answers, right? So this one is the calculator version. The system validated is where you do the math and then you check it to see if it worked. Right? So as for which one's, better or worse, it's not really any difference. I mean, they each have their place, but that mostly ends up being a workflow type question. Which version does your site prefer? And you may pick and choose. I know some of the clients that I've worked with, they'll use like system generated for product ABORH, like center train domain, and then they'll use the system validated for patient testing. Or they'll use the system generated in their non-prod domains for testing, and then they'll switch it over to system validated in the production environment. I don't know. So there is all sorts of different ways you could, hypothetically use those. It's just really up to how we want it to interact with the end users, really. I think for ours that we're building, we'll just do system generated, since we're not really here to test our transfusion medicine knowledge. We're just here to test that the build works. Okay, then from there, we move on to screen number 2. So you guys click to the next button, basically. And what we've got here is those component procedures I keep mentioning, right? Where I've got everything aside from my interpretation. Now, what I'm going to do here, first and foremost, is decide which of these procedures are going to be relevant to my interpretation, and which ones could I potentially get rid of, only for the purposes of figuring out the blood type, right, or whatever result it is that we're interpreting. If we think about how our ABORH is usually built, the examples that we've been going over, the order is going to have an assay on there that says previous history. And it's our blood bank previous history. Does the patient have previous history or no previous history? Pretty simple, straightforward little alpha response. Its job is there to just collect that little data point and then we're done. But whether or not the patient has a previous transfusion history has nothing to do with their actual blood type. I mean, if you have like a previous transplant history, especially of bone marrow, then there might be something there that we're taking into account, but it's not actually changing my results. The results for my blood type are a combination of anti-A, B, D, D control, A1, and B cells. That's it. So if I'm building on an interpretation for this order, then I don't really need the previous history to arrive at my final answer. I want it as a result, but I just don't need it for the interpretation, if that makes sense. And so what I would want to do when I'm looking at it in the tool is just remove previous history, because there's no point in it being there. Again, it's not removing it from the order, it's just removing it from the interpretation pattern. We'll do that with anything that we deem is just, excuse me, not really relevant to the patterns that we're going to be building. Sometimes it's, sometimes it is something we want to remove. Sometimes it's, it's not. So some orders you'll have everything in there and you'll want to make sure that everything is a component procedure. On others, like this one, nope, we can go ahead and get rid of any of the extra stuff. And then, once we figured that part out, we can go ahead and select the assays that are required. Now with blood bank, most of the time, all of your component procedures will be required to complete the interpretation. That's pretty normal. Maybe occasionally some one-offs, but most of the time it's just an all or nothing sort of interpretation, minus any of the DTAs we've removed, of course. And then we have the performed versus verified. The usual way that we're building blood bank interps, we don't usually need to build anything other than performed here, meaning that the result just needs to be in a performed status for us to be able to do the interpretation. It doesn't have to have been previously verified. The only time really that we use the verified option there is in combination with those columns I skipped over where it says cross time, time, and units. What that allows you to do is include component DTAs that were previously resulted, either as part of another order or just had been resulted previous to whatever this interpretation is. That, like I said, is not really something that we do a lot with blood bank. We have it every so often for GenLab. I think it's is it the GFRs or the creatinine clearances we do that sometimes for? But anyway, that's neither here nor there. That's GenLab. But it is not a common feature in blood bank. Usually our interp is being done at the same time as the rest of our results. So performed is fine, and we don't really need those cross-time columns. Then we come to our third screen of the tool. I'm going to put a little asterisk next to third screen because this view that we have here is actually going to repeat. And so see how up at the top It tells you your component procedure is anti-A. So that's the first one it's going to start with. Well, you're actually going to repeat this screen every time you click next for each and every one of the component procedures. So if my interp has 6 component procedures, I'm going to see this screen 6 times. So this would make up the third of the top 3 of the most confusing parts of our interpretation. And that is hashes. People get so confused by the concept of hashes. And thank goodness I understand, and I can go ahead and clear up some of the confusion here. But first, before we get into the hashes themselves, we have the top portion. We have choices in there for species, race, gender, and age. Because we can technically build different interpretation patterns with the same order for different species, different races, different genders, different ages. Not usually something that we're doing for Blood Bank. I know you're probably getting tired of me saying that, but that's the result of this tool being shared by multiple different modules. So unless we are building different patterns for the same order for different ages or different genders and the like, then we can just have a single row of parameters at the top that says apply to all, right? All species, all races, all genders, all ages. It's not easy to correct the issue if you end up with erroneous rows in the top part of that box. Personally, I find it easier to just back out of the wizard, go back in, modify the interpretation that I've started, rather than try and figure out how the heck I'm supposed to fix the row that shouldn't be there, because unfortunately you cannot delete it when you're in the tool, but you can just say, nope, don't save that, I didn't mean to do that, and start over. Well, at this point you shouldn't have to start over. We should have already seen one of those save boxes that asked me if I wanted to save my build so far. So if that's the case, then all I would want to do is go back into modify mode. Anyway, so that's the top part. As long as we're not doing anything super crazy with the interpretation, then just have a single row up there at the top part, and then we have our hashes. So if we look at this pretty standard, very commonly used set of alphas for our blood bank DTA here, we see we've got our 0, our weak positive, 1 plus 2 plus 3 plus 4 plus, not tested and corrected. 8 different alphas. We then have 6 different DTAs also with the same alpha responses. So that's 6 DTAs with 8 possible choices each to give results for. I'm no math expert, but if I had to build out patterns for every single combination, that's a lot. You're talking potentially hundreds upon hundreds of different combinations of, well, if I get 0 for this one and 0 for this one, but 1 plus for this one, goodness gracious, that sounds awful. Not only from a build perspective, but also a maintenance perspective, and probably not that great for the end users either, because they make a wrong judgment call and now the entire result's thrown off. So I think we can probably safely agree that building out inter-patterns for the individual alpha responses is not ideal. It's not a great choice. Well, can I group together similar alpha responses? Could I say, well, 0 means no reaction, but WP for weak positive, 1 plus 2 plus 3 plus 4 plus, those are all just different variations of positive. It's the strength of the reaction that occurs. So whether it's a very weak reaction or a very, very strong reaction, it's still a positive result. And so that positive result is what we care about for the actual interpretation of our results. So in that case, I could have an entire group of alpha responses for those 5 different DTAs. Weak positive, 1 plus, 2 plus, 3 plus, 4 plus. I've now cut down the number of possible patterns drastically. Right? Now, instead of hundreds upon hundreds, we have 4 different choices, because you're going to have the 0 for no reaction. You're going to have the 1 that just represents positive. You're going to have another one for not tested, another one for corrected. So we've made progress. Now, here's another interesting thing. Blood bank does not actually care if we build out all of the different combinations. So when we build out our patterns, the A plus B equals whatever, it's not actually necessary for us to cover every single option. So our usual recommendation when it comes to these interpretations is go ahead here on these hashes screens and give every result, every possible result, be it alpha or whatnot, and give it a hash, like I did here. Right? It's probably pretty rare that I'm having to use the not tested and corrected for most of my orders. They're there just as a just in case sort of option. So I don't use those very often. I don't really need to build interpretation patterns for them, but I am still going to go ahead and designate them a hash or a grouping of my result values. So I'll build the hash, but I won't build the patterns for those last 2. So really all I'm concerned about is a 0 reaction or a positive reaction with any of those different positive choices. That means that, for blood types anyway, I actually only need 1 interpretation pattern for every blood type. When it comes to something like, it's called the antibody screen. With that one, since you've got a couple of different combinations of what means positive, then you'll probably have more. I think it's something like 9, I think, for the typical ABSC, 9 different patterns for interps. But you may be wondering, well, wait, why do we have to add the hashes, but we don't have to add all of the possible patterns? It's because of a functionality in BB result entry. BB result entry, unlike its other resulting cousins, if the interpretation pattern is not defined at all, nothing is in there for that particular DTA, then it is going to, my brain train just derailed again. I don't know where it went, off into the ether somewhere. Okay, so let me backtrack here. If an interpretation pattern combination is not defined, it's not in the system, result entry is actually going to give the end user a little option box that pops up and says, hey, pattern match not found. Do you want to manually reinterpret? So in other words, if it cannot find a match at all for what we input into result entry, it'll let the end user just DIY and do it themselves. That will save us an awful lot of effort when it comes to these interpretations, because now I just have to build my everyday sort of conditions, the ones that we most of the time see, but any of the weird one-off combinations where I'm using, like my not tested, my corrected, then those we can just, let the end user deal with it. Now, if I do regularly use those, then yeah, maybe it would be a good idea for me to add the patterns for those. But in general, we don't usually have to. All right, so again, we're going to do this for every single one of these, what you call it, component procedures. Ooh, good gracious. I think I need to go take a walk around the block, because maybe then I'll find wherever my brain got off to. Probably short-circuited because of that message. I saw someone post some random junk on Facebook about, oh my gosh, they're going to be trying to control our brains. I'm like, really? Really, guys? Anyway, I thought it was kind of funny. So it didn't actually mess with my brain. Probably just eating lunch messed with my brain. My brain's like, oh, it's nap time. Sadly, no. Finally, we come to the main event of the interpretation tool, which is our interpretation patterns. And so this is where we put together those hashes, again, the groupings of results, and give whatever our outcome is going to be. Now, this is the special case. This is my ABORH, so my outcomes are going to be my blood types. Whatever the results are that are available will ultimately depend on that interpretation type from the very first screen. If it's reference table, my options are blood types. If it's alpha response, my options are whatever alpha responses I already associated to my inter. If it's text, you type the text into the box, and so on. As we define the different combinations, and again, with blood bank, we only have to define the normal, quote unquote, normal combos of our resulting. Now, one thing that folks ask me pretty often is, why are the hashes defined as numbers? Right? You'll see that there's zeros, ones, twos, threes. That is another sign of just how old this tool is. So, as I'm sure you guys probably know, computers actually prefer processing numbers rather than characters that are not numbers. It has to do with the way they're ultimately coded, because of course most computers rely on binary, ones and zeros anyway. So numbers just make more sense. It's why in our database, we have a whole bunch of code values. We have a whole bunch of table IDs, because that's just easier on the system. So by extension, when we're having to process interpretations, it is a bit easier on the system if it has a number to represent its different patterns. You don't have to use numbers. This is not a requirement. So if for your hashes, you wanted to define something like neg, pos, int, cr, and then use those as the combinations for the interpretation patterns, go right ahead. Nothing's stopping you. The hashes will accept characters, alpha characters. The only things they're not fond of would be spaces. I don't like those at all. And special characters / punctuation. Those don't work either. Anything else is technically fair game for our hash identifiers, because this isn't anything the end users are seeing. They're just seeing, I put in result A plus result B and I get interpretation C. So we do have a bit of wiggle room there. The numbers, the fact that the numbers are still a thing is really just a case of we've always done it that way, and no one's ever really seen the need to change it. So you probably could technically redefine all of the interpretations with some kind of alpha string, but is it really worth the extra effort for something that only the builders are going to see anyway? It's probably up to you. Personally, I don't think so. Especially after so many years, I am just used to seeing the ones and zeros and twos and threes and everything else for our patterns. And then, of course, once we're done, we want to hit the finish button and Ta-da! We are completed with an interpretation. You can cycle back around to the very beginning of the tool and do another one, or you can close out. We are actually going to be building a total of 2 interpretations. One for our ABORH and one for our antibody screen. So any questions before we dive into the interpretation tool? Oh, okay. Well, then we need to go to, well, actually, there's a couple of different ways you can do this. You can either go to BBDB tools and go to the interpretation tool from here, but you can also access the interpretation tool as a standalone tool and open it up from the Millennium Applications folder. Either or. All right, up at the top, we want to select our activity type, which of course is blood bank. Or I'm getting ahead of myself. No, I'm not. No, it's blood bank. What am I thinking? I knew it was going to be one of those days. Definitely one of them. It's a day. I don't know if it's a good one, but it's definitely a day. The speaking part of my brain is on vacation. Wish the rest of me could be on vacation. I'd love to be one of those people that look into, like a travel writer or, getting paid the mega bucks to be a blog writer or something and just chill around the world. I think that'd be kind of cool. But since that's not something I have any sort of personal connection to acquire that kind of cushy job, I guess I'll stick to teaching about blood bank. So activity type should be blood bank. For this, it's safe to say that we, yes, do want to be in our add mode. They have started or have not started the build yet. I'm going to go to my interpretation detail, and I believe the book has us do the ABORH first. I'm going to select my order so I can pull in my component procedures. I'm going to select a service resource of all. Now it knows here that I want to use reference table because of my procedure type. My procedure type should be patient ABORH procedure, or order rather. And so it knows that I'm going to need that reference table to achieve my outcome. I'm going to need those ABORH values. Remember, it's only the ABORHs that utilize that reference table choice. If I'm sounding like a broken record, it's probably because it's a mistake that I see made over and over and over and over some more. Okay. That should be, one more, system generated. There we go. That part isn't super crucial. I just think it's a bit easier for most folks if we do the system generated. then we're going to click next. So there's our case in point. We have that previous history on our orders too. So the previous history DTA needs to go away. It's not relevant for the figuring of my interpretation. What you're going to want to do is select that row, and you're going to do that by clicking the button that's on the left-hand side of the table. I know it looks like it's just part of the table, but it is actually a button. So you're going to click that button. It'll highlight the row, a nice pretty blue color. And you're going to go up to the toolbar and just hit that lovely little red X. That should leave us with the 6 DTAs that we actually need for our blood type. So anti-A, anti-B, anti-D, D control, A1, and B cells. Okay. We're going to mark all of these as required. That would be important. And then we're going to set all of these result statuses to performed. Sadly, we don't have like an apply to all, so you just have to select them one at a time. So all are required and all will be performed. We're going to click next. And there we are. There is that first of the save boxes that I mentioned. So what we would like to do here is to, well, honestly, it doesn't really matter. If you want to save it, great. If you don't, well, that's your choice. I'm a huge fan of save early, save often. I've been burned too many times by a tool just not doing what it's supposed to do. So I find it easier to save as I go instead of wait until the end. Okay, now we're ready for our hashes. So on the top part of each of these screens, because remember this is going to repeat 6 times, we are going to want a single row on the upper portion. So notice that there are 2 add new buttons on the right-hand side of the screen. This is usually how folks get mixed up because they look exactly the same, but one adds to the top and one adds to the bottom. Most of the time we need 1 row at the top and then multiple rows at the bottom. So if you get it mixed up, you end up with a whole bunch of extraneous rows that you don't need. So I'm going to single click just once the add new button at the top. I'm then going to select that row. Again, by clicking on the button that is off to the right-hand side. Then I can come down here to the bottom, and I'm going to add with the bottom button. Okay. Result. It doesn't actually matter what sequence you put the hashes in. I usually like it to make sense, which is why I'll start at the beginning and work my way down. So I start with 0, and I give it a hash of 0, and oh no, now it's grumpy. So what's happened here is that I used something that the interpretation tool does not like. And we've already discussed that the interpretation tool is not a fan of special characters, it's not a fan of punctuation, but it's perfectly fine with alphanumeric. So if I just hit the 0 key on my keyboard, what's the dealio? Well, it turns out to be another artifact of just how old this tool is. It used to be many moons ago that the keys on your number pad, the right-hand side of a standard keyboard, that those keys were actually different characters from your typical number keys, the ones that run up along the top part of the keyboard. And for reasons I don't really understand, that 0 being a special character has stuck around, but they've updated the rest of the different numbers from that number pad, and they're going to work just fine. Another one of those mysteries of life, I guess. So I need to, if I'm going to put in a 0, come on, mouse, there we go. I'm going to put in a 0, I need to use the regular QWERTY keyboard, 0, not the number pad 0. And then I do it again, and I add a new row. Now, you can do this one row at a time, but I find it a little bit on the boring side to do it one row at a time. So usually what I'll do, I say, oh, I have 8 alpha responses. So I will add 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 rows for my results. And then I can go through and just fill out the table kind of all together, rather than having to go a little bit slower. And so I can do my weak positive, 1 plus 2 plus 3 plus 4 plus, not tested, corrected. And then all of these are 1s, and T is a 2, and CR is a 3. This, by the way, is coming out of your participant guide. So if you're like, is she just making this stuff up? No, not really. Trust me, when I make stuff up, you will know that I am making stuff up, because it is usually like so far outside of left field, we've come back around the right-hand side of the field again. So now this is going to definitely be the easier way of doing things. All right, now one last little thing that I would like to do before I move on to my next screen. And this is one of the fun little tips that I like to pass along. Little things that I've discovered over the years that aren't necessarily like things you'll find out on the wiki, but are very, very helpful when it comes to doing our regular build and maintenance. This little table of hashes, I'm going to reuse this for my other DTAs because they all use the same alphas. And so I might as well just use the same hash patterns. If I want to, I can copy this little table, but there is a specific way that we have to use that copy functionality. So what I would do is I would select only the white part of the table. So I click over here into my first 0 and then click and drag to select that table part. Then I'm going to do a good old Control C on my keyboard. Copy that to my clipboard. I'm going to click Next. Now I'm on to component procedure number 2. So I get to do it all over again. Pretty much exactly the same. One row up here at the top. Select the row by clicking on the button on the left. And then 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 rows at the bottom. And this is where the magic happens. If I click into that very first results cell in that little table, and then hit Control V on my keyboard, V for victory, I have successfully copied those hashes. Now I can reuse them. Okay, now I'm going to do the same step for the other DTAs, the rest of these component procedures. Okay, so that's anti-B. I need anti-D, should be next. Oops, I accidentally added a row down here. Now, if you end up with erroneous rows at the bottom of the window, like I just accidentally did, that's okay. Those ones we can get rid of. So all I have to do is select the row, hit the red X up on the toolbar. It's asking me if I'm sure I want to delete that because it might affect my patterns, but in this case it won't because there's nothing there. Next, anti-D, 1 row at the top, 8 rows at the bottom. And I can paste again. I love copy paste. Next, this would be number 4. 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. And paste, and next. Paste, and next. And paste. So give everybody a minute to finish putting those hashes in there. And then we'll move on to our patterns. All right, everybody done with their hashes, ready to move on to the patterns. Okay. Next it is. Aha, another save box. Well, that's okay. I'll say, yeah, I'd like to save again. Now I just need to plug in these hash patterns. That's what I was trying to say. So this is going to be page 32 in our participant guide. So if you're like, wait, the heck, where is she in all these numbers? It's in our book. So remember, if you want to type it in rather than having to click through each one of the drop downs, you're just going to hit the number. So like 0, enter, 0, enter, 0, enter, 0, enter, 1, enter, 1, enter. And then that would be O negative. Okay, so I don't think you need me to describe every single one of these. So I will go ahead and put mine in. If you guys do have any questions, of course, you know where I am. But I'm just going to go ahead and... Oh, wait, one little tiny second. How in the world do I get another row? Because I just have this button, I have a finish button, I don't have an add button. Well, yet another one of the things here where the tool is just ancient. Right, so instead of it giving us a separate button to move on to the next line, we're going to do it old school. And once you get to the end of the row, you just hit enter again. And there we go. There's our next row. So reach the end of the row, hit enter again, and that's it. So this one, be positive. End of the row, enter again. This is, well, doesn't really matter what order these are in either, but we'll say, just go back based on the order that's in the book. And so this would be 0, 1, oops, that's 2, 1, 0, 0, 1, 0. Be negative. Be positive. Yep, that's a positive. 1, 1, 0. That's my A, B negative. And that one is my AB positive. So again, give you guys a couple of minutes to finish that up, and then we will move on to the next one. anybody need a little bit more time to finish up this first interpretation? No? Perfect. So we will go ahead and finish this. And I'm going to go back to the beginning, move on to the other one, which is our ABSC, or antibody screen gel. So I'm going to add for my initials ABSC. Oh, look, it's reminding me just how my no interp exists. Yep, I already knew that, but thanks. Okay, order catalog is antibody screen gel. Service resource is all. Interpretation type. So this is a lovely example of where we might be using something other than a reference table. In fact, this is probably the more common configuration, because we won't have a lot of the APORH procedures, but I'll have a whole bunch of everything else. So I am going to, let's see, I would like my final outcome to be an alpha response. Alpha response. And we'll leave it at system generated, that's fine. That will work. Alrighty, I'm gonna click next. Interpretation does not exist. Yeah, I know. I know it's not existing. Okay, thanks for the reminder. I'm going to mark all these as required. We don't need to remove anything. We're going to leave the 3 that are there. And we'll just set these to performed. And next. Then we're going to do the same exact thing with the hashes that we did before. In fact, using the same exact hashes as before. So this is going to be my row up at the top. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Paste. You should still be able to copy and paste as long as the little table is still out on the clipboard, which should hypothetically be. SC3. Grab this one. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Pasty paste. And then once we get to the end, I can go ahead and build out my patterns. Do I wish to save the information? Sure. I go back and reference my table here on page 33 because I always forget some of these combinations for some reason. There we go. So that's not too bad. Once you are done, just don't forget to go ahead and click finish. And give everybody a minute or two here to get that done, and then we should be finished with our interpretations.
So on one of those, you made a duplicate,
Did I?
and I'm wondering, will that cause
Oh.
an issue downstream?
Quite possibly. Thank you for noticing that. Let's see, this should be my 101, 110, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. Okay, which one did I miss? 0, 0, 1, 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, 1. I don't know. Maybe I just overcounted there. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. It says there's 8. Yeah, it might. I mean, as long as the answer it's giving is the same, hypothetically, probably would just be fine. But yeah, it could potentially cause result entry to have a tiny bit of a conniption fit. Alrighty. Anybody need a little bit more time to finish up their interpretation patterns?
I have a question.
Sure.
On the results row, those are the alpha response. It pulled it from the alpha responses that we built in the reference ranges.
Correct. Yep. So here we're actually seeing the alphas that we associated to each one of the DTAs. Well, actually, we're seeing them associated the hashes, and then we're seeing the hashes back over here. But the results, yes, those are what are connected to that ABSC interpretation assay that we did in Bedrock. Yep. Right, any other questions? Oh, you know what? Oh, go right ahead.
So
Love questions.
On the ABO interpretation, the result, like we get those blood types like the OPOS, because it's on the reference table, right? That it's already
Correct.
built.
Correct. Yep.
That's the reason we don't have to define the alpha responses, because it's already out there in the reference table.
You got it.
Okay.
Yep. So we do it that way so that, you know, in the very unlikely event that our blood types were to ever change, it still updates that reference table and we don't have to worry about going back and messing with alpha responses. But that would be very unlikely at this point. So yeah, it's just the way that the database has it stored as a separate table instead of like a code setter or something. But yeah, ABORH orders are special because of that. Alrighty, any other questions? All right, well, time certainly flies when we're playing with interps, so I think this would be a fine time for us to go ahead and grab our afternoon break, because if my watch isn't lying to me, it is almost 2:30 Central. So we'll take a quick break, we'll come back, and we will continue on with some reagent cell groups, some result groups, and then some build testing. Very exciting plans for this afternoon. So I'll see you guys back here in approximately 15 minutos. 15 minutes.
Siri, cancel timer.
Did you hear Jan? She went to the orthopedic surgeon, and the surgeon told her, "Oh yeah, the chiropractor's irritating you. You gotta stop going to the chiropractor." So I said, "Can you ask him to put that in writing?" He said, "Yeah, he's making the condition worse." Wayne was the one that said you need an MRI, you need blood work, Wayne recommended the orthopedic too.
We do not mix with these people.
Yeah,
You can't do it.
well, the surgeon sees that they're dumb white trash fuckers, so I said, you know what? Now he's sending you to PT, but that's not gonna irritate his back. Wayne never adjusted. Wayne just did the thing that he does with
You
me.
guys did everything you could do and they're so ungrateful and they're not
They don't have that tomorrow.
educated, they don't know how to be.
He will never go back to work, guaranteed.
Who?
Dan, he's done. If he goes the route with the surgeon, he's never gonna. And she goes, "Oh no, we're not gonna do surgery." I said, "Okay." He knows he's booked with surgeries. He's okay. Go ahead. Let's see how you do in 6 months.
And neither of them can read.
I know. That's another. I know.
Well,
When you walk in the door and it says orthopedic surgical group outside, the only tool he has in his bag are surgical tools.
I used to have this very large cup.
They still do. It's clear, plastic. Much in the dish.
no, it's accepted.
Let's see that.
I got it. Got it.
I use it for water.
No more neighbor friends, they're not our friends. They're not my friends.
Fantasy's out of the budget.
Cheap place to live.
I just kind of think to myself, especially, why didn't we buy a building when we way off for years?
He said, I asked him to it's too expensive. We're not good.
How much is this construction gonna have to be paid?
80 for a year.
All right. Excuse me. Welcome back, everybody. We are gonna have some more fun, and we are going to talk about some more things related to some results. So let me get my PowerPoint back here. Ba-do-do-do-do-do. All right. So we're going to move on to our reagent cell groups. Reagent cell groups are something a little bit unique to blood bank. So in blood bank, we have certain types of tests that we'll do where instead of only testing like the patient cells or the product cells, we're doing product testing. We might actually be running that test against multiple different sample types. So we call cells. So multiple different types of cells. They're not like super common. It's not like all of our tests are built this way, but there are going to be a few of them that will be. So, yeah, I think it's useful to know what's kind of going on behind the scenes here. So our reagent cell groups are just that. It is a group of cells that we'll use for different types of orders. Because of the way the functionality, functions in result entry, though, sometimes if you only need one type of cell, because the system's going to prompt you for it anyway, because that's the way the order is designed, then you are going to have just a group with one single cell in it. So I think, is our antibody ID built that way in the system? Not the ones that we're building, the existing one. Antibody ID. I think it is. So if I were to go to, say, department order entry here. Since we haven't gotten ours all the way built out, I figured I'd just use the existing one to show you what it's going to look like. So this is our antibody ID, identification of our antibodies. And this is one of the types of orders that has the ability for us to select these reagent cells. So go over here to result entry. And put in my session number. And it's going to pop up this little box, right? So it says insert phases /cell/inter. The cell is this little drop down here. Now for my antibody ID, I have a separate little group built out for it. I have others for my antigen testing. So I go ahead and select that. But then once this pulls in, there's just a single cell in this group, meaning that I'm going to have just a single set of results. Right? If I need more than one, I can pull in more than one. So like the The other example, the antigens, just to show you what it looks like. If I select one of the ones that says with controls, I'll now have additional cells for a negative control and a positive control, in addition to my regular patient cells that I'm testing. Right? So that's what it looks like if there's multiple cells in the group. So all we're doing with this reagent cell groups build is generating these little groupers that we use for these types of procedures. So antibody IDs and antigen types are probably the two most common ones that use this, but there are others out there. So that's what we're going to be aiming for to create these. So with our reagent cell groups, pretty basic little tool, right? So here's my cell group, give it a description, select my available cells, and move it on over. So this shows you what that singular little group would look like. Now, the thing of it is, something that's a little bit odd or unique here, is that these cells do have to be built separately. And these aren't really, I mean, it's not an order. We're going to use it for part of an order, but it's not an order itself. It's not a DTA. It's something special. And so it actually has a special type of build. It has a code set all of its own for these reagent cells to live in. And so we're going to use our handy dandy reasons with meanings tool to update this special code set. And we'll talk more later about the whole reasons and reasons with meanings thing, and kind of get into the various different types are for. But essentially, the reasons and reasons with meanings are ways of updating certain code sets, really. Reasons for doing things, but also some other stuff that's out there too. So that's how we're going to add to the tool. And then we are going to actually put it into a little group. So any questions about this before we go ahead and do some build? Okie dokie. So let's go on over to first that reasons with meanings tool. That will be opened from our good buddy BBDB Tools. Just here, reasons with meanings tool. Open that up. And in here, we're looking in the dropdown for the reagent cells option. Okay. And then here in our lovely little...
I didn't
mini-
notice you were opening the app, and I was just watching you. Do you want us to open the app right now?
Preferably, so we can do the
Okay.
activity. If you want to watch, you can, but you'll need to do it later anyway.
Okay, yeah, give me 1 sec. I got it open. Thanks.
Yep, no problemo. So we got our reasons with meanings here. And so I'm going to go to the last row in the table. Easy enough. And I'm going to put in initials ABID. Or my initials antibody ID. Now for these, the reasons with meanings thing, where that comes from, is the CDF meanings. If you guys ever worked with a core code builder, you might remember those. So the CDF meanings allow us to assign some kind of additional functionality to various different code values. And so here we have ones that will either be patient cell or product cell or none of the above, because none of the above is actually an option. What this is doing is it's telling the system, well, which table should I update? Because remember, we're not only doing the patient results for blood bank, we also have the product results. So we're going to make this a patient cell. Things like those controls that I showed you before, those end up being just none of the above because they're just quality control results. So we'll record them, but we don't actually need them to update the patient history or the product history. Okay. Now, we've seen these little table guys before, and we know that there is something that we need to do because otherwise it isn't going to work. So what we need to have is an extra row at the bottom of the table. So make sure when you get to that meaning column, you go ahead and hit enter again. So we get our blank row. Then I can go ahead and save, click OK. All right, I'm done with the tool, so I can cancel out of that. Now I'm going to the reagent cell groups tool, because that's where I'm going to make my little grouping. Where did my tool go? That's weird. User error, I guess. Alrighty, so what we want to do here is we want to start with our cell group name. So we're just going to type right into that box. And we're just going to call this initials, oops, too many capital letters, antibody ID. Put the same for my description. And then I'm going to find my cell from my available cells list and move it over and save. And that's all we need. Click applied, save that, and then it'll add it to this little drop down here. And it is done. Hooray. So, any questions about reagent cell groups?
Caitlin, can
Yeah.
you? Sorry, I saw the steps. I followed it, but I don't think I connected the pieces. Why do we do that again?
It's the way that results entry is going to be processing the information. So even for groups like this one, where there's just a single cell that we're associating, we don't have a select individual cell as a choice in result entry. There has to be a group, even if that group just has a single member. So the whole point of the cells is to allow us to potentially be testing our, in this case, antibody ID order against different cell types. Whether I need to do that or not, the possibility exists. And so the cell, since it's not really an order, it's not really an assay, it's built as its own separate thing. We call them reagent cells. And so we build that in the Reasons with Meanings tool because there's not a place to put them here. They have to be built out in their own code set. And then we use the grouping tool to build that group that results entry wants us to have, basically.
Got it. No, thank you.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Any other questions before we go ahead and move on? Okay. Awesome. So next in here, this is more just kind of an FYI sort of thing. You may not ever really need to mess with these too terribly much. It is a kind of a similar concept. So required testing phases. So when we're dealing with some of these special blood bank orders, we're not only testing the order against the various different cells, we're testing the order against different testing phases. So most commonly what you'll see used in blood bank is these different phase tests will have an immediate spin phase where we just stick the sample in a centrifuge, spin it out, then test it. There's another phase where we put it into a 37-degree water bath to simulate human body temperature. Another phase where we'll add the human anti-human globulin as like an additional reagent. And then usually there's a fourth like check cells type phase. But we can use all sorts of different combinations of those in our testing. And when we say phase, we just mean like a state that we're going to put the specimen through. So whether it's something that's just spun out immediately or whether we're warming it up to human body temperature, whatever. The testing phases, kind of like those cells that we talked about, they do have the potential to have different groups where you could have these different groups of phases, mix and match them for the purposes of different tests. Now, we don't really do that much anymore. Usually the testing phases are just associated directly to an order because each order will have certain conditions that it's tested under, and that's it. And that's all we need. So the required testing phase groupings have kind of fallen out of favor. You may still have some lingering just depending on methodology, but for the most part, probably not too terribly many of them. But there is one major exception, and that's going to be our cross matches. So the computer cross match being the most obvious example, where with that computer cross match functionality, we have, well, we need to have rather, a flexibility to be able to go between the computer cross match versus the serological cross match. And because it's actually built under one order, it's just one cross match order, we use these testing phase groups to switch back and forth. You know, which version am I doing? So that is the one major place that we do still utilize these phase groupings, but that's not really something that's changing. So it's not really something that you're going to find the need to ever really do a lot of builds for, let's say. But the tool is going to work just the same way that the other grouping tools have, with the one addition of this phase group type. And so that's where we can specify whether something is used for our cross matches or not. So whether it's the serological cross match, the computer cross match, and we should be on track to have a quick little chat about the ins and outs of the computer cross match build, like tomorrow before we start on the final activity. So we'll talk a little bit more about how all that kind of comes together tomorrow. But for now, we don't really need a testing phase group for any of the orderables that we're working with. So we will just say, yes, this is something that we'll have, probably won't ever really need to be building any, unless, of course, you are making the switch to a computer cross match. That's a little bit different. But then it's just building out the possible flexible options, and then that's it. So it is pretty straightforward, even if we do have to do it. So I think that's it. So any questions on our required testing phases? No? Okay. Well, then we will go ahead and move on to the, oh, I forgot I had the screenshot in here. So what this is actually showing you is the two parts coming together. So here's my reagent cells in their reagent cell group. Here would be my different testing phases. Here we're using all 4 of those main testing phases with the immediate spin, 37 degree, AHT, and check cells. And then we could put in the results for all of our different cells under the different phases. So interesting fact about these types of orders is that usually when we're putting in results in BB results entry, we go from left to right because we're going across, this is one entire order. I go left to right, move on to the next row, and so on. But because of the way this is typically resulted, the immediate spin phase will be done first with all the different cells, right? So I test my patient cells, my positive control, my negative control in this example, and then I move on to my next phase. So you're actually going to go down each column in these types of tests before you move on to the next column or the next assay, as these actually are. So they're a little bit unique, a little bit interesting when we have the whole thing all together. All right, one last thing that I'd like to get our build done with before we go on to the great testing event, and that is going to be our results groups. So result groups are an optional functionality that are pretty darned helpful, but not technically something that we need to build out. You probably will have at least a couple of them, but maybe not necessarily something that we have to build quite a lot. So if you think back to that little end user workflow activity we did way back on Monday, keep forgetting what day it is, but that was Monday. We selected the test group in BB result entry to filter our accession number. So I was able to narrow down the accessions that I was looking at, and hopefully kind of cut down on the entering results in the wrong place, or just having things cluttering up my window when I don't need them right now, things like that. That's what these test groups are. They're actually result groups. I have no idea why they're called test groups in the front end and result groups in the build tool. That's the way it's been for forever, really. I don't remember a time when they weren't like that. So it's just a decision, I guess, that made sense to somebody at some point. But that's okay. We can keep that. We can keep that in the back of our heads, right? We can remember that. So you'll have the groups up here at the top. So the group name, usually just based on whatever it is that we're filtering out. What in the world was that? Something just fell off my desk, but I didn't move. Mysterious. Anyway, so we'll have these groupings, and then we'll just move over the orders that are going to be part of the filter. So here, just as an example, I see my ABORH group. So if I just want to narrow that down to only my ABORH procedures, that's going to be either the ABORH or the ABORH retype. And so that is the result group / test group build.
So Caitlin, those, I'm getting a little confused here because I hear three terms being used that sound like they're talking about the same thing. Result groups, test groups, and then on the screen it says selected orderables.
Right, because
what we're really talking about here is groups of orders.
Yes.
Okay. So it should just be called orders all the way through. Thank you.
I suppose. I mean, it is a group of orderables, but I guess they thought that it didn't really make sense to call it an order group. Why? I have no idea. You can travel back in time 30 years and ask somebody.
Yeah, right. Thank you.
So I'd say it's definitely like a lot of the other things that are in our system where the terminology doesn't always make the most sense. In charge services, we use the term schedule a lot to talk about groupings of data. Like price schedules has absolutely nothing to do with a calendar. It's just groups of prices. So I'd say it's probably kind of along those lines. Whoever was making up these names, they just kind of winged it. So let's go ahead, hop on over to our tool, and we are going to have our own little grouping here. there's my window. And we are looking for the BB result group tool. BB result group tool. Why this one has a BB at the beginning of it and the rest of them don't, also, I have no idea. Okay, just like we did before, we are going to put in a little group name up here at the top. Now, this one is actually pretty limited in the characters that we have available. I think it's like 10. And if you try to go over that, it's really just not going to let you. So if I were to try and type in here, type and screen, I can't. It just says, nope, sorry. So that's why I abbreviated this a little bit and decided to just call it a T and S. T ampersand S. Then if I hit Tab, put it by longer description, type and screen. What else? I need my orders. I'm going to scroll down here. So type and screen is made up of the ABORH and the antibody screen. So move my ABORH over and my antibody screen over, and that should be that. And I just click OK or apply to save, and it's ready to go. Right, any questions? Nope. Okay, then it is time. We have officially reached a good point for us to go ahead and test our builds. And so we are going to be working on the end user workflow validation activity that is on page 34. So in my personal opinion, and the opinion held by a lot of the people that I know, your build isn't actually done until you make sure it works. Because how can you say something is finished if you don't actually try it out? You really can't. It's like if I'm going to, I don't know, build a porch. Maybe I want to add a porch onto my house. Maybe I'll even make it real fancy. It'll be one of those catios for my kittens. I'm going to build it, and then I'm going to go stand on it to make sure that it actually stays up, right? I don't want it to come crashing down. That would be terrible. So we are going to do the same basically with our build, and we are going to make sure that we are able to get things to work. If at any point you have questions, if at any point you have issues with your build and have trouble figuring out what's going on, I am more than happy to go ahead and give you a helping hand to figure out what's what. But if we do find any significant issues, then I would recommend that we go ahead and fix them. But the good thing about blood bank when it comes to testing and troubleshooting and all of that is the vast majority of our issues are just build issues. So if I get a message in results entry that says something about cannot process the interpretation, well, I'm going to go back to the interpretation tool and I'm going to see what its problem is. If I have trouble, getting my collection requirements, it won't let me see my collection requirements in when I'm placing the order. Well, it's my collection requirements. So it's just a matter of being able to just get comfortable with what's going on and be able to identify things and go, oh, okay, that's where that is. I need to go fix it. So we're going to start with, I see my chat message lit up here. Does not come up. Ooh, interesting. You are right on top of things. Well, let's see what happens. So we are indeed going to be starting with some orders. So we are in department order entry. So let's go ahead and open it up. Let's see, DL4. I was able to get them to appear right away. So you might try, if it's not wanting to work like a second time, maybe try restarting the application. I know that in code past, like past versions of our code in our train domains, we've had issues where the search didn't want to work right, but I thought they'd fixed that a while back. So patient's definitely in there. It just seems to be a little bit of an application issue. So when at first we don't succeed, I guess we give it another go. But yeah, that can be kind of frustrating. So, okay, I see what you're saying. So if you do this, DL4, weird. I'd say it's one of those car mechanics sort of things. And when I have issues with my car, it's making a funny knocking noise, and then I take it over to the mechanic, it never makes the noise. They're like, I have no idea what you're talking about. And then I feel really dumb. So I'd say it's probably one of those things. The tools are always on the best behavior when I do it. So if anybody else has issues with finding their patient, let me know. Ideally, they should all be in there. Okay. So we're going to go ahead and we're going to start by searching for our orders. And let's see, I shall do actually my type and screen first, my care set. So if I type in initials, type and screen. Ta-da! Okay, so that should be our first step, is to see, are we able to get the type and screen to pull up? Are we going to be able to select order details for it? And so we'll just make this like a stat, collection priority. And let's see, what else? We'll mark it as collected already. Specimen receive location should be CP for central processing. And then We need our ordering physician, so we'll just use Dr. Carter. Maybe just type Carter, comma, K into the search box. She'll come right up. And then that should be everything. So if I hit the add button, it should add them down there at the bottom. I should be able to see I've got the care set, but then indented underneath it are the individual orders. So I've got the ABORH and the antibody screen. And this hopefully goes without saying, but since the whole point of this adventure is for us to test our build that we've been working on, then make sure that you're using your build items, the ones that have your initials on them, and not just the standard ones that are built in the system. I had someone a few classes ago that did that, and
Yeah.
so they had to go back and do the whole thing again.
Yes.
Which is fine, it's more practice, but
Oh, this is a really bad
definitely
time.
trying to make sure. Yeah.
Can you call back in
Question,
like? Can you call back in
Let's say
like
you
an
forgot to
hour?
add the ordering physician. Is there any way to check it here?
Thank you so much.
Well, since it's required, it won't really let you continue if you don't have it in there.
Oh, okay.
If it's not marked as required in the order entry format, then hypothetically you could, let's say that I need to go back in and adjust one of these orders. You can just double click on it and it'll pull it back up, assuming that you haven't submitted it yet. Once you've submitted it, then you'll have to modify, to actually go in and modify or correct the order. But if it's a required field, then you won't even really be able to get past that point.
Okay. Thank you.
Get it? Let's see. So there's that. Then I am going to, what's the next one it wants? ABID. Okay. Antibody identification order. Go ahead and search for that. And should carry over all of the different order details that I already entered, which makes things a lot easier.
I have a question.
Yes.
What's the difference with the primary and ancillary orders that show up?
That's your synonyms.
Okay.
So primary synonym will just be that main name of the orderable. Ancillary synonyms are those optional additional synonyms that we put in so that, if there's some alternate term that, well, for ancillary, it'd be the lab folks would be used to using. If it's DCP, it'll be the nurses and doctors are used to using. So it all ties back to the same order, which is obvious via the description, right? So see how for my ABID, my description is the same, whether it says antibody ID or whether it says ABID. So that's what will show you that, in fact, it's not duplicate orders, it's just different synonyms.
Okay, thanks.
Okay. So I just make sure all of my order details are still filled in here, which it looks like they are. They are supposed to carry forward, so that's good. And then I'll just add that one. That brings me to 3 orders. You'll have 4 lines because you'll have the care set on there, but it's actually a total of 3 orders. And then I think it wants one more. It wants us to do a cross match. Now, we have not built out a cross match because you can only have one in the system, especially when you're using the computer cross match functionality. If you're not, then yeah, you can have multiple cross matches. But since we do have it configured, we just have the singular order for cross match. So we'll go ahead and search for that. And yep, everything is good there. I'll add that to my Scratchpad. And once I have all of my orders, I can go ahead and submit them. Now, if I do submit all of my orders in one lump sum, so I don't do like fill it in, submit, fill another one in, submit, and so on. But if I add them and then submit them, I should have, well, interesting. I should have just a single session number, but I do not. Look at me making an example of myself. How about them apples? So that is, it's not a deal breaker, but you know, in this case, I end up with an extra session that I may or may not really need. So, I mean, I can still continue with my testing, but when I notice things like that, I usually like to go ahead and just figure out what I did wrong. If I had to hazard a guess, because remember we talked about how those orders group together or don't via the accession classes. So my guess is that I goofed that up somehow. I bet I just selected blood instead of blood bank on one of them. So let's go over here. And next. Need my initials. All right, so session class blood bank, collection class blood bank, good. ABID, session class blood bank, collection class blood bank, antibody screen. Aha, there it is. So my antibody screen, I selected blood instead of blood bank. So that's an easy fix. I'll go ahead and just save that update. I'm not going to bother re-adding my orders because it was a little thing, and it's not going to stop me from being able to continue on anyway. But it's little stuff like that. Yeah.
Sorry, I did the exact same thing, and I recall when you marked it as blood and not blood bank, and I thought it was on purpose, so I followed. Okay, so I went into associated assay and
it's collection requirements.
That's where I missed it. Okay, collection requirements, got it.
Yeah. Sometimes I do things like that on purpose, but most of the time I can manage to make an example out of myself without even trying. It's a talent. It definitely keeps things interesting for class purposes, I guess. Gives me something to do, gives me something to talk about. So, as I was saying, it's little things like that that are good reasons to do testing, to make sure that we catch those, because again, I mean, it's not a huge broken thing, but it matters. It's going to change up the workflow a bit.
But the accession number would remain the same.
Yeah, I mean, it's not gonna grandfather into the build that already has been to orders that have already been placed. Correct. Yeah. So that's why I said I'm not gonna go back and re-add the orders because it's not really necessary for what we're doing, because we're trying to keep this relatively simple. All right. Anybody else have any issues adding those orders, getting a session numbers before we move on? Nope. Okay. Now then, let's see. What shall we do next? Let's go over to order result viewer. I always like to include this step just to make sure that we've got everything in lab already. Remember, we said that our orders need to be to that in lab status. They got to get to their receive location for us to be able to test them. So the way I have us place the orders with them already marked as collected, already in a receive location, they hypothetically should be ready for testing right away. But I do like to double check. Sometimes there'll be folks that miss the step about marking it as collected, and then we have to go through and do the collection step. That's not a build issue. That's a workflow issue. Easily resolved. So there we go. There's my orderables, and they're all in lab. Ignore that ABID. That's the one I was playing with earlier. So I should have my antibody screen, my antibody ID, my ABORH, and then just the generic cross match. And they should all be in a lab. That's what we want.
So on mine, when I did the DOE, in DOE, I did see the, well, I thought I had seen the antibody screen, but it's not in yours.
Well, you can go back in and just add it individually. That's fine. If it doesn't work a second time, well, then we'll have to do some more digging. Trying to remember, I actually had that happen in one of my last classes, but exactly what was going on eludes me. I think it was actually in one of my power plans classes. We're having issues getting our labs to show up. Anyway, so if re-adding that order doesn't work, just let me know and we'll see what we can find. Okay, so other than that kind of stuff, any other issues? Where we go ahead and start putting in some results. I think we're going to do a couple of our orders here. Okay. Not seeing anything, and I'm not, hearing anything on the phone. So our next step is to go to blood bank result entry. Let me close out of some of this stuff here. Over here to my Millennium Applications folder, and I am looking for result entry BLDBNK. Result entry blood bank. Okay. once I get my little new worksheet window, I want to go ahead and use this as an opportunity to select my test group. Right, remember that grouping of orders that we put together? We want to go ahead and select the one that we built. So there's mine right there. And then I click OK. Right, so we have 4 orders that we placed. If we use this test group, we should be able to narrow it down to only 2 orders, the ABRH and the antibody screen. Hypothetically, that's what we should expect. So if I put in my accession number, well, actually, mine's going to be a little bit goofed up because it ended up putting my ABRH on one accession and my ABSC on another. But if I do 7, there we go. It's still going to, the filter's still going to work. It's just, I have 2 different accession numbers instead of the same one. Right. Not hearing that we had any issues with that. So next would be some results. So does my patient have previous history? Well, actually, yes, they do now because we gave them a transfusion on Monday. So again, that's not going to affect my final outcome of my blood type, but I'll say yes, they have previous history. I'll put in some results here. So I'll do a 0, a 0, a 0, a 0, a 1 plus, and a 1 plus. And I get that O negative. Now, if it does not automatically generate your O negative, try selecting it, because it could be that you just forgot to switch that interpretation over to system generated instead of system validated. Another one of those very, very minor things. It's not affecting whether or not the functions, whether the build functions, it just affects a little bit of the workflow.
So at my lab, the interpretation for the ABORH doesn't automatically select itself. You have to do it manually. And I'd really like to change it so it's like how it is in here.
That's the system generated versus the system validated.
What application is that in?
The interp tool.
What was it?
Yep.
Okay.
So interpretation tool. When you look at the interpretation, it's got those 2 little radio buttons down there.
Okay, for ABO. All right. And the system validated is when it does it automatically.
The system generated is when it does it automatically. System validated is when you have to select it and then it checks your work. I think somebody else had a question in there.
No, I was just going to add mine asked for, or it didn't generate it. So I picked it and then it asked for override reason. So that means that when we were doing the interpretation tool, like I must have forgotten to go to system generated instead of...
No, so if it's asking you to override, that is, it could just be like a typo or a misclick in the final pattern. So for the ABO, for the O negative, it should be 0 for anti-A, B, D control, and then 1 plus 1 plus for that. So that's hypothetically what it should look like. Let's see. Blood bank. Yeah, so the reference table. Got those. This happens sometimes. so this is something the tool does. It's another good reason to test our build. I don't know why it does this, but sometimes it will just randomly remove these results. Yeah, it's frustrating. I've yet to be able to figure out exactly what its issue is. It has something to do with the copy paste, and that's why I said, like, if you don't get things exactly the way that it wants you to have them, then it freaks out. But very easy to fix. Oops. Just go back in here and put these in. We won't even have to re-add anything, because the interps will auto update. So the system actually queries the interp table right as you're putting in the results, which does make it easier for testing purposes. But yeah, the number of times I've had to go back in and do this just because the interp tool is a pain in the rump. I'd be a millionaire if I had $1 for every time I had to do that. So just finish that, and yeah, go ahead and give that another try.
So put back the results into
Yep.
that.
Yep.
Okay. Well, it already auto-populated as.
Yay! That's your system generated at work.
Oh, okay.
You got it. Awesome. And then I need an ABS-C. So this one we'll just go ahead and make that one positive.
So is it gonna have a critical pop-up?
It will not, based on the way we built it. So we did not specifically consider the ABS-C positive as a critical result, because that's not usually how we would define it. Now, if your site does, that's those, let's see, reference ranges. That's those report values. Make that a little bigger here. Where is it? ABS-C. All right, so this is that report value column. So if you did want to flag a positive antibody screen as a critical result, then you would just use this report value to do so. But the yellow there in result entry is just saying, hey, FYI, you got a positive antibody screen. That's a special function of combination of result entry and this type of test.
Thank you. Yeah, my site, they do every antibody screen that's positive is a critical.
Fair enough. Yeah. So that would definitely be one of those just workflow things. They want it to be like that. So probably so that there's an extra flag that goes out either for clinical validation to the docs. I mean, a bunch of different reasons. I think I have seen that done a time or two as well. Some of the sites that I've been to.
Yeah, and we were asking, we had a ticket that got canceled because they said it wasn't possible, but for the cord blood DAT, we were asking for a critical pop-up if it was positive or some kind of flag, and our informatics team said it wasn't, they weren't able to do it.
I mean, it would be
It'd
the
be the
same sort of configuration.
Same thing, right?
Do we have one of those in our system?
It's a cord blood DAT.
Yeah, so if you wanted to have it flag critical, you just set that report value to critical. Probably similar to how your antibody screen is done.
Thank you. I'll talk to them and fix it.
Yeah.
It's
now, as far as like a pop-up, that'd be a little bit different.
Okay.
But just a flag on the result is, that's how I do it with alphas.
Okay.
Now, there may be another reason why they didn't want to do it, or they said they couldn't do it. So that's something I've run into a lot across many different solutions. Is I'll be like, "Hey, can we do this?" And they'll be like, "No, that's impossible." And then come to find out, it is technically something we can do, but there's like a workflow reason why it's not a good idea, or it's something that's going to like violate a standard somewhere. So yeah, maybe there is a little bit of room for a little discussion going
Yeah.
on there. So
Well, our last blood bank super, she was trained by Cerner about 10 years ago, but then she retired. But she comes in about twice a week now, and she was complaining to me about a month ago about this and how nobody was able to fix it because she forgot how to do it.
Mm.
So,
Yep.
yeah,
Well,
I'll talk to
there
her.
you go.
Thank you.
No problem. All right, so let me go ahead and verify these results. Password. Where is my cursor? There it is. All right, so that should go ahead and verify successfully. As long as I've got everything in there, it should clear out that worksheet, which is what we want. So any other issues here before we move on? Okay, good. So we now have a positive antibody screen. A good next step would be to identify the antibody that's making our screen positive. And so we're going to now need to result out our, what's that thing called? Antibody identification. I love it when simple words just slide on out of my brain. So with our current worksheet, it is filtered to only the ABORH and the antibody screen. So we need to actually change that filter. And so we do that by right-clicking on that tab. So right above where you put the accession number in, you're going to right-click on that tab, go to Properties. And then here, we'll just clear out that test group by selecting all procedures. And click OK. Now, if I put my accession number back in here, I have two other orders that need results. I have my antibody ID, which is what we're trying to do, and then I also have that cross-match. We're not ready to play with the cross-match just yet because we're going to need some products to do cross-matching. So when this flexible cross-match box pops up, just go ahead and cancel out of that because we're not ready for that one. And then it should give you another box for that antibody ID, which is the insert cells / phases / interp box. And here, you should be able to go ahead and select your cell, that cell group that we built. So there's mine. And then I just click OK. Now I should see my patient. There's my procedure. there's my cell right under my patient's name, and I've got 2 DTAs. I've got my panel IDs. That panel ID is actually just a text DTA. It is going to basically just be a way for us to put the information about the specific antibody panel that we used in here with the result. So if you just if you just click into the box and then start typing, it'll let you actually pull up that text result. So just something simple, enzyme treated panel. I'm not gonna have us spell out the whole kit and caboodle of the panel ID here. Then for our antibody identification, well, we discovered those new antibodies this week, so I might as well go ahead and give it to my patient or identify that my patient has it. So if you just scroll down to the bottom of that list of antibodies, you'll find all of the new ones. That code set's a little bit odd, and it usually is putting it puts in code value order, so the new ones go down at the bottom. I don't know why that one's different from some of the others. I think you can force sequence it in the either the sequencing tool or in Core Code Builder.
What's the character limit for the panel ID?
Text-based assays? I don't honestly know if there is one. If there is, it's something like, I think some of the upper limits for some of our other text fields are things like 32,000 characters.
Yikes.
Yeah, so it's more than likely sufficient for what we need it to do. Yeah. Free text, which I don't even remember if free text is an option for Blood Bank. But free text is, I think, 25 characters. Yeah, okay, it is. So yeah, if you build something as free text, it's something like 25 characters. Text, I believe, is unlimited. Or if there is a limit, we're realistically never going to meet it. All right. So I've put in my antibody. I'm gonna go ahead and perform my results. Or not perform, reading the button and not the participant guide. I'm gonna verify my results. Well, you can perform them and then verify them. It's fine. But I like to just go ahead and verify. Then we're gonna get another pop-up. I'm just loaded with pop-ups here today. It's gonna ask if we want to complete the AB IDs. We talked about this a little bit on Monday. If we have things like antibody identification, antigen typing, cross matches, where we might potentially later on need to add additional results, it's usually easier to leave the order in process than to have to complete the order. We need another antibody ID done, and so we then have to re-add the order and go through the whole kit and caboodle again. So we personally, for this activity, are not going to be identifying any more of these antibodies. So yes, we can go ahead and complete it. But if you say no, that's okay too. Our domain will end up getting refreshed probably before it expires and completes itself. So no big deal. All right, now go ahead and clear that out. And that's another order tested and done. So let's see. Any questions on that particular part of our activity? Nope. Okay. Then we are going to real quick finish up the last part of this, which is just to do a little bit of receiving of products, and then we're going to run it through a cross match. So I do not need result entry right now, so I'm just going to close that, get that out of the way. And so I want to go to BD receive products. So we've tested our orders. Now we're ready to test our product build. Receive products is probably going to pop up with a like a where are you today box, and it's just asking us basically where are we going to be receiving the products to based on our owner and inventory areas. So you can go ahead and say that you are at your inventory area. And then click OK. And now then, my visual inspection, it looks fantastic. So we'll give it an OK. And then, let's see what else. I need my supplier. So I will go ahead and select the supplier that we built way back when. And then my product number. Let's see, what are we doing here? So we'll do initials, test 01. This one will make a positive, but no, that's not a typo. There's usually a reason for my madness. My product type, I'm going to use my E0164 RBC CPD 450. And then for an expire date, I'll just push it out a little bit so it doesn't expire during class. Put in a volume of 450. And add. I'm going to do another one similar to that. This will be initials test 02. This one's going to be O negative to match my patient this time. And I'm going to use the same product type. So initials, E0164, RBC. Expire date, push it out a few days. Put in my volume. And then I got one other step here. I need to put in the special testing. So that middle search box there at the bottom. You hit the magnifying glass. And we want to make sure that our product is typed as negative for our antigen. So you're gonna find your negative antigen, move it on over. And click OK. And then we'll add that one. So we should have 2 products. And we can go ahead and save those lovely new products. And it should be that. So anybody have any issues with receiving their products? Oh, chat message again. The special testing goes on test 02. I mean, you could technically put it on both if you wanted to, but I did it this way so that when we do our cross match, you'll be able to see some of the validation exception messages. But it needs to be on the product that's O negative so that we are able to cross match it to our patient. If I said test 01, I did not mean to. That was my fault. I am so many times tongue-tied this week. Alrighty, once you are done receiving those products, you can go ahead and close out of received products. Alright. No need to print stuff. So output need not apply. No outputting needed. We are now going to go back to result entry so that we can do some confirmation testing real fast. Because our red blood cells, when they are received, it's one of those trust but verify sorts of things where we do want to just kind of make sure that the blood that's in the bag is what it says it's on the label. So when we go back in here to result entry, we'll have the product number selected this time. Right. And then I'm going to put in my 2 product numbers here. So initials, test O. Well, I did it backwards, but that's fine. Test 01, test 02. And then I just put in some results here. This part we did not build. So we're just making sure that our products are available. The interp is going to be there in our book. So anti-A will be something like 1 plus 0, not tested, and 1 plus. And then O negative should be NT0, 0. Let's go ahead and verify those. Search. All right, so far so good. Now, the only thing we have left is our cross match. And since we are already here in result entry, what we can do, here's a nifty little trick, is right now my worksheet is in product number mode. And as you guys probably know, the product numbers are product numbers, but then the accession numbers have that Julian accession number format. But what you may or may not know is we can actually switch between those without having to have a whole new worksheet. So if I have my cursor, right, see, look at my little cursor there in my product number box, and then hold down the control key on my keyboard and hit the enter key. Hey, look at that. Now it's got my session number format. Fancy. And then I just put in my session number. Bam, got my cross match box. So, we have the two options here. We can try to do our computer cross match. If I click OK. Oh, well, that's why I said try. We did not succeed. It says the patient is not eligible for a computer cross-match. They have an antibody screen on positive results for the current sample. And we also have a history of clinically significant antibodies. So both of those are going to say, nope, sorry, no computer cross-match for you. And it even says no override, right? The override is grayed out. So, well, darn the luck. I guess we have to click OK. And it's going to take us back to that flexible cross-match box where you can select the phases. This is that testing phase part that I was talking about. And there's probably going to be just one option in there. But that's okay. So we'll select our extended serological cross-match. And then we get our cross-match procedure here. You can see our lovely antibody there on the patient. It looks fantastic. And so now what I want to do is right underneath my patient's name is I want to put in, well, I could try my first product number. So initials test 01. Oh, some more exceptions. So this is just a quick little check there of the, well, it says product is of an unmatched group and type, so that's our patient product compatibility, hard at work. And then we also have the patient has anti, and then my antibody there. And the product has not been typed as negative. So that would be our antigen antibody relationship validation. So how about that? Well, both of those are gonna say that, well, I can't use that product. So I'll say okay. And then I should be able to put in the second product. And if I got it received correctly, this should work. So I should get my assays over there on the right. There's a place to put that info in. And then I just put in some results. So we'll do this and say it's compatible. And then just verify that. Do I want to set the product to cross-matched? Yeah, I do. That'd be nice.
I got a square that says opposite antigen excludes on product. I did the special testing wrong.
Not necessarily. Let's see. I would like to see which application do I want to go to. Let's try correct inventory here. Okay, special testing.
The Tesla 3 says on the Tesla 2 I didn't put the
Okay, so it is O negative. It is negative for the antigen, so that part's good. So let's go back and double check that special testing. So antigen opposites. Yep, you just don't have your opposites. You've got them matched up instead of opposite. So we would just switch this and switch this. It happens all the time. Those pluses and minuses are really hard to see in that tool. And then save that. You could try, let's see. You could try re-entering the product, and hypothetically, it should recheck that validation. And it should work.
Now I'm getting that error.
I don't think I need to. Well, this one is kind of obnoxious sometimes.
I've noticed that sometimes you gotta close out the result entry and then open it again.
Yeah, that might do it.
It's working.
Okay, here we go. Yeah, this particular code set also is a little bit slow to actually cache the code set out to the code cache server. So sometimes it is a little pokey. But sounds like we got it working. Yay! All right, and then there should be, I think, one other question there. It asks something about do you want to complete the cross match? You can say no, and you'll have one less step to do in your final activity tomorrow. Or if you said yes and you completed the cross match, then you'll just have to re-add the cross match. You'll just have to reorder it. No big deal. So that, I believe, is... we'll save the modification for tomorrow. No big deal. That one should be super easy. So as long as you are able to get that cross match successfully resulted and everything else came out okay in the wash, or we were able to get those things fixed, then you should be good to go. And we will have one more day together where we'll finish up the last few sections that are there in our participant guide. It's nothing too terribly crazy. There's a quick little FYI about we've got reasons with meanings and preferences. We're not going to go into too much detail there. And then we'll do kind of an interesting little overview about BBQC, and we'll take a quick look-see at the computer cross-match as requested. And that should be it. So we should be in line to be starting on that final activity, probably somewhere in the neighborhood of lunchtime. And it is nothing too terribly crazy, nothing too terribly exciting. It's a little bit of new order build and something to do with products. So not the entire shebang of things that we've been doing. So if you guys don't have any other questions or anything, then feel free to go ahead and log out, and we can